Hello again, and welcome everyone to our 9 a.m. session about human AI integration in the CX and considerations for decision making. We're joined today by Renee Gosline, who is a senior lecturer in the Management Science Group at the MIT Sloan School of Management and principal research scientist at MIT's Initiative on the Digital Economy. So let's see. Sorry. All right. Yes, that is all the description. Very large description for Renee. So Renee, thank you so much for joining us, and the stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Hello, everyone. Greetings from the mountains of New Hampshire. So I'm going to apologize in advance if my Wi-Fi isn't perfect. It's tough to get good Wi-Fi out here, which I'm sure we could talk about with respect to infrastructure all day long. But having said that, I'm super pleased to be here, and I'd like to share with you some of my thoughts, some of my research as we think about human AI integration and what that means for decision making. So let me ask you to put yourselves in a situation, a scenario. Imagine you have a goal, you want to get home, or you want to get to work, assuming that's something that's possible. And so your decision task is the route, what route to take. And like many people, you use an algorithm to assist you in this. So here actually is a screen capture from my own route to get to MIT. And as you can see here, a couple things. One, the traffic is pretty bad when I'm trying to get into work. And you can see sort of that I have three options presented to me by this app. And the options are pretty similar in terms of time length, but there are many options in terms of what that route will be like and ultimately my choice. So the question that keeps me up at night, other than my toddler son, is which AI advice do you follow? Which of these routes do you choose? How faithfully do you stick to the route? And how are these decisions made in situations from GPS, as we see here, like we've all been in, to a variety of decisions that we make every day as we have a variety of platforms and infrastructures mediated by technology, but ultimately affecting human choice. So I think about this because there are lots and lots of bots, lots of algorithms, lots of artificial intelligence that's meant to improve our decision-making and aid that. However, the development of those things has outpaced our understanding of this human-AI dynamic and who and when AI is most helpful and who is more likely to make decisions, as I presented to you earlier. So in fields as far-ranging as driving to financial advising to healthcare, to admissions for schools, and even grading. These algorithmically mediated choices are becoming more and more commonplace. And it's important then that we understand what that means for micro-level individual decisions, but also then the macro-level patterns that we see emerge as these things become part of the structure of a variety of organizations. So with my research, I tend to choose the behavioral lens. So in the human-AI integration relationship, I think a lot about the human and less about the actual coding. And I wonder who embraces AI input in the decision. And so there are many factors that play a role here, and some of which I'll be discussing today. But they include cognitive style. So what is cognitive style? So I'll give you a quick pop quiz. Imagine, once again, you're driving, but this time you're driving on a dark, rural area, a road, and you see this pop out in front of you. What do? Now, most people would say they'd pump their brakes, they'd mash their brakes. And although we might say, well, we take into account the velocity of the vehicle, the mass of the deer, the direction of the wind, in the situation, we fall back on these behaviors that are habituated and that are common and comfortable and familiar to us. And that is representative of our System 1 decision-making. It's fast. It's intuitive. You don't need a formula to make the choice. And whether it's right or wrong isn't really the defining factor here. It's that it's fast. Now, that kind of decision-making is really important in a situation where you're trying to avoid a crash. But then there are other decisions, right, that require more deliberative decision-making. And that is our system 2. That's slow and reflective. Now, you may be familiar with this if you've read Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman or are familiar with behavioral economics. And I bring that up because I want that to be sort of the foundation that we use to evaluate human-centered AI and how we can design AI systems that take this human aspect, the way we make decisions, into account. So rather than a false dichotomy of man versus machine, I seek in my research to understand how human intelligence can augment AI and vice versa, and how the cognitive biases that we have when we make those quick decisions, the ones that are comfortable and familiar to us, can be enabled by or combated by AI. And that's super important now as we understand the role, for example, of systemic racism and how we can bake in, either unwittingly or sometimes knowingly, the biases that we as humans hold into systems and into infrastructure. So I like to think about this as the human is increasingly outsourcing their mind, outsourcing a lot of the decisions to AI. And therefore, we're evolving from Homo economicus, the rational utility maximizing actor that is described in the field of economics, to Homo technologicus, this almost hybrid version of a human where we nimbly move back and forth between technologically mediated decision-making and platforms, and how that's become less and less conscious, and what that means when we're trying to make better decisions. So back to our original example with the GPS and the understanding of the potential of AI. If you've been in this exact position, there are multiple variables that may act upon your likelihood of adhering to AI advice. So, for example, the time. Although these are very close in time, the length, you may be making some kind of decision with respect to the cost. Is the 6 extra minutes worth it, for example, to go for the route that's just about one of the shortest available? You also may be thinking about cost in terms of price, looking at the toll. Well, $1.25 toll versus $1.50 toll versus free. That may figure into your choice. There's also the human factor, right? The cognitive style, how you look at these various numbers and symbols and how that affects your analysis of the decision. But also signaling. So, for example, I adhere pretty closely to what the GPS says, even when I'm using it for routes with which I'm familiar. But my husband seems to have this kind of desire to compete against the algorithm and beat it. And so he deviates almost in a desire to signal his superior expertise when it comes to decision making. So thinking about the human factor, right, affects how we engage with the AI, whether we compete with it in a desire to signal our expertise, and whether we need more graphical interpretations versus numerical, for example. And then, of course, the programming factor, the algorithmic bias that might be baked in. Perhaps this is taking us on routes that are likely to expose us to businesses that have paid for exposure via this app, right? And profit concerns accordingly. So a behavioral understanding then of the potential of AI is, I think, an important element as we try to not only understand who uses it, but really solve some of the societal ills that are potentially baked in. So I want to talk a little bit about these. The ones in red are the research that I'm pursuing right now at MIT, and they involve experiments with real people. So if you're ever interested in any of these topics, whether it be from you would like to talk more, or you have data or that sort of a thing, this stuff is percolating at MIT, so we're always happy to talk with alums and other potential partners. So the big question is then, on any given day, how often do you incorporate algorithms into decisions? Or what proportion of human versus AI input factors into your decision? Now, you may not have the answer to this, and frankly, I don't know either for myself. But importantly, our perception, whether accurate or not, reflect our likelihood of trusting in AI and adopting that advice. And so this is my research, and I'd like to share a little bit with you today. So in general, people prefer human advisors. And we don't necessarily think that that's a stable trait. Obviously, over time, as AI becomes more and more integrated in all various aspects of our lives, our comfort with robots and algorithms and AI and machine learning will increase. However, there are some individual differences that predict what we see in terms of behavior. Now, one phenomenon is algorithmic aversion. Algorithmic aversion, that is your actual recoil, your desire to avoid an algorithmically input advice or decision. And so in experiments, research has shown that when people are asked to make a choice about a potential operation and they're given algorithmic advice versus human advice, holding the quality of the advice constant, you see in these cases algorithmic aversion. And the explanation for that is if something goes awry with the operation, you want someone to blame. And it's kind of hard to yell at an algorithm, although certainly people do that with digital assistants. Now, the inverse of this is algorithmic appreciation. That's actually a preference for algorithmic input versus human input. And this has been observed, for example, where people were asked to guess the weight of this gentleman in the picture you see here. Algorithmic appreciation is when an estimate is more likely when there is a discrete and concrete answer, and you believe that the algorithm is more likely to generate that correct answer, whereas human fallibility is less likely to bring you to the ultimate correct answer. But research that I've done with Heather Yang, a doctoral student at MIT, has looked beyond the features of the actual decision task and looked at cognitive style of the choice maker. And what we've found in our research is that people who have more of a system 2 style approach to decision making, more reflective, deliberative thinkers, are likely to exhibit algorithmic appreciation. In other words, people who are more system 1 thinkers tend to exhibit algorithmic aversion and prefer human input, and people who are more reflective system 2 thinkers tend to prefer or be algorithmically appreciative of decision making, in their decision making. And we've looked at this with a variety of decision settings, financial investment management, healthcare choices, admissions to colleges, hiring decisions. All of these settings have repeatedly shown that more reflective thinkers are more likely to have higher levels of algorithmic input accepted in their decision choice, and that this is moderated by perceptions of mediated by perceptions of accuracy, that there is this ingoing assumption that algorithms are more accurate than humans, and that's why we see this. This is an important outcome for us because System 2 deliberative thinkers are the ones who tend to really rise in organizations. They're able to defer rewards. They're able to really sort of succeed in ways that other impulsive thinkers are not. And so we think about this because when we come to the scourge of algorithmic bias, we need to think about who's more likely to trust algorithms from the door. And if there are people then who make decisions about loans, about admissions, about hiring, then we can see a real opportunity for there to be algorithmic bias baked into these systems that are ostensibly meritocracies. So moving on then, we're doing this research, and then we entered a COVID-19 world. And digital transformation happened super rapidly in that many companies, Microsoft included, for instance, said that they'd experienced more digital transformation in 2 months than they had in 2 years. And so many more sources of human and algorithmic advice and that kind of decision of hybrid and when to take one and more than the other have been presented to us. And particularly in the COVID-19 world, there are many sources of human and algorithmic advice. Some are better than others, but we have many applications of machine learning and AI in helping us to predict everything from outbreaks to whether or not you are infected or likely to be infected to advising policy. And so when we think about this, how do people make decisions with all of these sources in a time of great uncertainty and great risk? So some of the research that is ongoing that we're doing now looks at this particular infrastructure touch point, which is the initial decision to seek medical advice. That is diagnosis from a physician, taking into account what you may be experiencing if you have symptoms and what your behaviors have been like. And so these are just some examples from a variety of tech companies that are meant to be a first touch point to people as they decide whether or not to go further and seek medical advice. So this decision touch point becomes really important. As you can see, there are artificially intelligent screeners, but there are also human screeners that you can call and talk to as well. So we wanted to look at this and understand how do we decide at this touch point in the customer journey or in the CX. And so this issue of cognitive style comes up once again. So let me further explain what cognitive style is so that we can understand our operationalization of this. The cognitive style we measure using the cognitive reflection test. It's a measure of whether or not you tend to be system 1 or system 2 dominant in your decision making. And it's a robust test that has been used in a variety of applications and actually is so robust that just 3 questions can give us this response. So the first question is, a bat and a ball cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? The second question, if it takes 5 machines 5 minutes to make 5 widgets, how long would it take 100 machines to make 100 widgets? The third question, in a lake, there is a patch of lily pads. Every day, the patch doubles in size. If it takes 48 days for the patch to cover the entire lake, how long would it take for the patch to cover half the lake? Now, I'm asking you these questions. You ostensibly don't have paper and pencil. But the important part is that people who get these answers correct perform significantly higher on the CRT. So the more questions you get right, the higher your CRT score, the more you are a system 2 thinker. And this correlates with behaviors like reward deferment, lower risk aversion, and higher self-control.
Renee,
Now,
I think that, sorry.
Yeah.
Just wanted to jump in. We have only a couple more minutes, and I wanted to leave a couple minutes for a couple questions that have come up. So we have one question. Now that we're talking about cognitive style, I figured we could answer Karen's question, which is how can people... So her question is, how can people get better info about when an AI is more trustworthy versus when a person is more trustworthy?
That is an excellent question. So I'll tell you how people make the decision, and then we can talk about how we can possibly solve it. So people tend to use system 1 or thin slicing to decide who's more trustworthy, right? And so research has shown that things like who smiles or not, even whether, your eyebrows are furrowed versus not, can create fast and not necessarily accurate, but fast decisions around who to trust, people and so on. Now, obviously, artificially intelligent beings don't have the features that human beings have. And so this is an important thing to take into account because AI may be presumed objective and neutral, simply because it doesn't bear the kind of markers that people typically use for thin slicing. Now, people have taken this into account when, for example, choosing avatars that represent AI, choosing the voice of assistants, female often, for example, and trying to increase trust this way. But the question becomes, how can we solve that problem? And I think there are two answers to that. One is we need to have design teams that are more inclusive so that we don't reify and we don't support the biased thin slicing that kind of happens when we say, oh, a female digital assistant is more innocuous or helpful or even subservient than a male digital assistant, for example. But we also need to employ nudges in our kind of decision-making process that can interrupt or ask people to kind of think outside of their immediately gut instinct system one style, because the best way to interrupt that is to make these choices more conscious. The more conscious you can make them, the more we start to realize what exactly we're assuming in the first place. But that's a great question.
Thanks, Renee. And we've got a few more minutes, so I'll hand it back to you to wrap things up, and looking forward to the rest of your presentation.
Super. By the way, these are the correct answers to those questions. I'm sure you all got them right, but if you didn't, no judgment. They're deliberately meant to throw you off and for your System 1 answers to be wrong. So I just want to quickly show you kind of what we're looking at here. We're trying to find out whether people prefer like-minded or complementary advisors. So in other words, are humans, assuming that humans are more kind of understanding of emotion and therefore prefer humans that way if they're a System 1 thinker. So are System 1 thinkers looking for System 1 type analysis, therefore humans? Or are System 2 thinkers looking for more analytical advisors, therefore AI? And is there a complementary where you look for the opposite of what you are, or a twinning or like-minded approach? And we did this experiment with COVID-19, and essentially what we found is that, yes, once again, people tend to go with their gut the lower they score on the CRT. And also that they believe that AI is more deliberative than humans, and humans are more intuitive, probably not surprising there, although that belief is stronger among low CRT people, so people toward the 0 and 1 accurate answers on the CRT score versus people who are more System 2 and got more of those answers correct. And so what this happens, or what this results in, is that low CRT people tend to prefer humans, but high CRT people tend to engage in essentially a cognitive matching style. So they want something analytical because they are analytical as well. So I'm going to wrap it up by saying we don't know whether high CRT people are more likely to adhere to stay-at-home orders, but I think it's an important lens, the behavioral one, to put into place. Also, that we need to design customer experiences and human-centric systems that recognize bias more explicitly and make the value up front, but understanding that the biases that the humans have and meet them where they are. Because if we don't design this way, then people won't use AI and the benefits won't be realized as well. The value of experimentation, all of these insights were done with more than just A/B testing, and so it's a critical tool, really, to understand how to build human-centered AI, because what people tell you and what they do are often two very different things. And then this human-AI bias interplay is really important, and presumptions of AI neutrality are a really sort of pernicious assumption that lead to behaviors that can actually be harmful to people. And I'm working on a book with MIT Press that looks at this very issue, so I look forward to having more to share. Thanks, everybody. That's what I had to share with you today. If there's time for questions, I'd be happy to take some.
Thanks so much, Dr. Gosline. I think, let's see, we might have, okay, I'm going to give you one more question, but
yes,
we only have 1 minute to answer if you can take this really quickly. So Anonymous asks, how can companies make algorithmic insights more interpretable, relevant, and trustworthy for decision makers? How can you build trust through education?
Yes, Great question. In 30 seconds, I will try to say that you need to experiment with the messaging and the communication. The communication of data and data visualization is an extremely powerful tool. Get familiar with data viz strategies and experiment with those to see how you communicate affects the behavior. Doing those kinds of experiments will be far more insightful because past behavior is more predictive of future behavior, regardless of what people tell you.
That was amazing. Thank you, Dr. Gosline. Really appreciate your time. And it's just such a timely topic now more than ever. We have to think about how AI is being included in decision-making, especially when human lives are involved. So thank you. And attendees, thank you for joining us. Our next session will begin in 5 minutes at 9:30 a.m. And we'll see you over at the next link.
Thank you. Bye.